Hey folks, welcome to Last Records. Today I'm covering people who went out in such ways that were so absurd that you'll wonder how it's even possible. From a man trapping himself inside a helium balloon to another who pushed a drinking challenge way too far, turning a silly idea into a full-blown tragedy. It was April 12th, 2021, in the fenced backyard of a rented house in a quiet suburb of the American Midwest. A bright spring afternoon hung over the grass. A handful of friends gathered around a phone propped on a tripod, a giant clear inflatable ball, and a rented helium tank waiting beside them. Jory Tennant was 24 and chased viral stunts the way other people chase a paycheck, forever certain that the next big idea was only one video away. He had a habit of treating every stray thought as content, the kind of person who heard a single piece of trivia and immediately started planning how to film himself, testing it for an audience. That afternoon, the idea came from an old claim he was sure he could make go viral, that a high enough voice can shatter glass, except he wanted to do it bigger, to shatter a giant inflatable ball from the inside using nothing but his own voice. I get the appeal of chasing a good myth, but the jump from hearing that a singer can shatter a wine glass to sealing yourself inside of a balloon full of gas is a leap that I'll never understand. The plan was simple, in the way only a bad plan can be. Climb into the clear ball, have his friends zip it shut, then flood it with helium from the rented tank so his voice climbed higher and higher until, in theory, the sound broke the ball apart around him. His friends crowded around with their phones, howling at every squeaky word he forced out, not one of them thinking anything was wrong. Helium is sold as a harmless party gas, but it carries no oxygen at all, and breathed inside a sealed space, it quietly pushes the breathable air out of the lungs, with none of the burning, gasping warning that running out of air normally brings. By the account his friends and their own footage later gave, the danger was hidden inside the very thing that made it funny. Every breath of helium Jory gulped to crank his voice higher was trading away the oxygen left inside that sealed ball and inside his own lungs. And because the gas brings no feeling of suffocation, he never once felt himself running out of air. He got loose and giddy and slap-happy, slurring his squeaky lines and laughing along with the crowd, looking exactly like a man hamming it up for the camera. Then his words trailed off, his head lolled, and he slumped against the wall of the ball and went still. So apparently, from what the footage and his friends showed investigators, that ridiculous squeaky voice everyone was laughing at was the sound of him quietly suffocating, and none of them could tell. For a while, the friends outside kept right on filming and laughing, certain he was playing dead for the bit, calling for him to do the high voice just one more time. The thing I find almost impossible to accept is that the silly cartoon voice was never the joke. It was the sound of the last air leaving his body, and every laugh outside only burned through more of the time he did not have. By the time it finally dawned on them that he was not moving at all, real minutes had slipped by, and they scrambled to tear and unzip the ball open and drag him out onto the grass. He was not breathing. They started doing what they could while a friend called for help. But the brain only lasts so long without oxygen, and the paramedics who arrived fast could not bring him back. He was pronounced dead at the hospital, and the medical examiner ruled the death asphyxia from oxygen deprivation, the helium having pushed the air he needed out of that sealed ball. Helium feels like the safest, silliest thing at any party, and to me that easy reputation is exactly why not one person in that yard recognized a deadly emergency unfolding right in front of them. No one else was found at fault, and the death was ruled a tragic accident born entirely of his own stunt. The friends who laughed the loudest were left to live with how long they waited, and the video meant to make him famous instead became the footage explaining how a party trick had quietly killed him. That one suffocated on the gas that was supposed to be his big punchline. This next man needed no audience of strangers at all, just a few people he wanted to impress and something solid to hit. It was July 22nd, 2019, at a crowded summer block party in a residential neighborhood of the American Southwest. A hot evening had settled over the street, music going, a cluster of people gathered on the grass near the sidewalk where a young man was holding court. Trevon Eddings was 26 and a gym regular who never met an audience he did not want to perform for, especially when there were women watching. He had a habit of narrating his own feats before he did them, flexing and announcing each one like a ringside hype man, certain that the bigger the claim, the better the reaction. That evening, he had already broken a couple of scrap boards over his knee and cracked a thin patio paver with the side of his hand, soaking up the cheers each time, and the small crowd egging him on only made him hungry for a bigger, harder, more impressive target to hit. I have been around plenty of guys who like to show off their strength, and there is usually no harm in it, but the need to keep topping yourself in front of a crowd is exactly how people get hurt. Looking for a grander finale that would top the boards in the paver, Trevon's eyes landed on a green metal utility cabinet at the edge of the lawn, the kind of pad-mounted box that sits quietly on a concrete pad in a lot of neighborhoods.
So, people there supposedly told investigators that Trevon bragged that his bare fists could hammer clean through the solid steel cabinet, squaring up to the green metal box to throw everything he had into one punch.
What gave the stunt its real danger was that this was no ordinary box, but a live piece of the power grid, plastered with high-voltage warnings he waved off as part of the dare, and a hidden fault had left its metal housing carrying a current it was never meant to. Dry skin gives a body some natural resistance to electricity, but a sweaty hand pressed flat against energized metal on a hot night drops that resistance away and turns a person into an easy path straight to the ground. The danger was never the punch he was bragging about. It was the very first instant his skin touched the metal. That cabinet was live electrical equipment, stamped with the high-voltage warning labels that mark every one of them, and Trevon had singled it out because it looked like the toughest thing on the block to hit. The moment his bare, sweaty hand slapped flat against the housing to load up his swing, his feet planted on the damp grass at the foot of the concrete pad, his body became a clean path for the current straight down into the ground. There was no second blow and no real punch at all. The electricity seized him at first contact, his hand clamping onto the metal as his muscles locked the way they do under that kind of current, so that he could not pull back, could not unbend his fingers, could not even let go of the box. He sagged against the cabinet with his arm welded to it by his own grip, and for a few long seconds, the crowd kept laughing and waiting for the big finish, certain the shaking was part of the bit. The cruel little irony I cannot get past is that the punch never even happened. The thing he was so sure would impress everyone was the one part of the night that never came. Someone realized fast that he was not performing and pulled others back from touching him directly, while a neighbor ran to kill the power.
Later, the utility company confirmed that the cabinet had an internal fault that left its housing live, the exact danger those bright warning labels exist for to keep anyone from ever laying a hand on it.
By the time he could be safely reached, it was far too late, and the medical examiner ruled the death accidental electrocution. To me, there is something almost unbearably silly and sad about it together. A strong young man killed not by the impossible thing he was bragging about, but by simply touching the wrong box. The utility was found responsible for the maintenance failure on the cabinet, and the fault was repaired and the unit flagged across the area for inspection. The crowd's phone videos, filmed to capture a feat of strength, instead became the footage that showed investigators he had died before he ever threw the punch. That one died reaching for a stunt he never finished. This next woman turned a quiet afternoon by a pool into a contest she was determined not to lose. It was June 28th, 2020, at a backyard pool party in a quiet suburb of the American Midwest. A bright afternoon hung over the water. A handful of friends drifting between the patio and the shallow end, drinks in hand, and the day winding pleasantly down. Annika Nadeau was 31 and fiercely competitive. The kind of person who could not let a casual challenge pass without turning it into something she had to win. She had a lifelong habit of treating every harmless game like it was the deciding moment of her life, going quiet and focused, while everyone else was just messing around. A few drinks into the afternoon, the group started daring each other to see who could hold their breath underwater the longest, taking turns going under while the rest counted out loud, and Annika, the only woman in the contest, was quietly determined to outlast every man there and settle it for good. I love a competitive streak as much as anyone, but the moment alcohol and a breath-holding dare end up in the same swimming pool, I start getting nervous about where it is going. To give herself an edge, Annika did the thing she had seen people do to swim farther underwater, taking a long series of fast, deep breaths in a row before she went under.
The reports I gathered stated that she hyperventilated hard at the edge of the pool to load up on air, then slipped under, determined to beat the time the others had set.
The terrible trick of it is that the urge to breathe comes from rising carbon dioxide, not from a lack of oxygen, and flushing that carbon dioxide out first means a person can quietly run out of oxygen and black out without ever feeling the need to come up. The cruelest detail is that Annika never felt the warning that should have driven her up for air. With the carbon dioxide flushed out of her blood, Her body had no way to sound the alarm, no burning in the chest, no clawing panic, nothing to tell her she was running out of oxygen at all. Somewhere past the point where she had pictured herself surfacing in triumph, she simply went still and slid into unconsciousness underwater, with no thrashing and no splash and no signal that anything at all had changed. To the friends counting at the edge of the pool, she still looked like a competitor refusing to quit, hanging on well past the times the men had set, and they cheered her stubbornness and called for her to come up. The cheering held right up until the count ran too long, then trailed into something quieter, and then into the first edge of alarm when they understood she was not coming up on her own. What makes this one so haunting to me is that there was no struggle for them to see. The very thing that killed her also hit it, so it looked like winning right, until it looked like the worst thing imaginable. They pulled her out and started doing what they could while someone called for help, but she had been without oxygen too long. Paramedics arrived within minutes and she was rushed to a hospital where she was pronounced dead. And reports stated the medical examiner ruled it a drowning, with the hyperventilation pinned as the trigger for what is called a shallow water blackout. It is a danger that water safety groups warn about specifically because it ambushes strong, healthy, confident swimmers. The ones who feel completely fine right up to the second they pass out, rather than the weak swimmers people tend to watch for.
The part I keep racking my brain against is that she wasn't in trouble because she was weak in the water. She was in trouble precisely because she was good enough to push it that far.
No one else was found to be at fault, and the death was ruled a tragic accident. The friends who had been laughing along with the contest became, in an instant, the people who had watched it happen without knowing, and the case was closed as an accidental drowning. That one was undone by a trick she thought would help her win. This next man was undone by nothing more than impatience, and a job that would have taken 2 extra minutes to do right. It was November 4th, 2017, in a tidy single-family home in a quiet corner of the American Northeast. A gray autumn morning sat over the neighborhood, the house still and ordinary, a man alone in his high-ceilinged living room with a small job he wanted done. Gordon Ashbury was 58, and the sort of do-it-himself homeowner who took a strange pride in never asking for help and never doing things the slow, careful way. He had a lifelong habit of standing on the very top of a ladder on the step printed with the warning never to stand there and waving off anyone who told him to come down. That morning, the only task in front of him was a single burned-out bulb in the ceiling fixture. A 2-minute fix by any measure, except the proper stepladder was out in the garage at the other end of the house, and he decided, the way he always did, that the walk to fetch it was more trouble than the job was worth. I have caught myself cutting this exact corner before, telling myself it is not worth the trip to grab the right tool, so I understand the instinct even as I know how badly it can end. Instead of the ladder, Gordon dragged a dining chair under the fixture and set it on top of a low table to gain the height he needed.
And from what I read, he supposedly climbed onto the table and then onto a dining chair stacked on top of it, balancing several feet off the hardwood just to reach one bulb.
A dining chair is made to sit level on a floor, not to perch on top of a table, and the higher the stack, the smaller the margin before a shift in weight sends the whole thing over. It went wrong in the instant he stretched up and out for the fixture. The dining chair shifted on the table beneath him, its legs skating on the smooth wood, and his weight slid out past the edge of the seat, with nothing solid under it anymore. The whole stacked tower of furniture went out from under him at once, and with both hands raised to the ceiling, he had nothing at all to grab on the way down. He toppled backward off the top of it, arms still up and useless, no railing, no counter, no second chance to catch himself in the open air of the room. He came down full force onto the hardwood floor and struck the back of his head, the drop and the hard surface doing in a fraction of a second what the whole careless habit had been building toward for years. There was no cry and no scramble for balance, just the short, heavy sound of the fall and then the house settling back into silence around a man who lived alone and would not be found for hours. What I keep weighing in my head is how tiny the errand really was. A single light bulb, set against a short walk to the garage he decided he was somehow too busy to make. Living alone, Gordon was not found until later that day, and the head injury from the backward fall onto the hardwood had been immediately catastrophic, the kind that leaves no time for a call for help, even if anyone had been there to make it. The medical examiner ruled the death blunt force head trauma from a fall. Apparently, investigators noted the chair still on its side on the table, and the proper ladder still folded and untouched in the garage the whole time. There was no foul play and nothing complicated about it for investigators to untangle. Just a stacked chair, a hard floor, and a stubborn shortcut that did not work out the way it always had before.
It always strikes me that the people who pride themselves most on doing everything themselves are sometimes the ones least willing to take the one extra minute that would have kept them safe.
Nobody else was involved and no one was at fault, and the case was closed as an accidental fall in the home. The ladder he had been unwilling to fetch was carried in from the garage by the family afterward, a quiet, useless reminder of how little the shortcut had actually saved him. That one would not spare 2 minutes for the right tool. This next man had every reason to put the blade down and simply could not resist proving a point with it. It was August 17th, 2018, at a backyard cookout in a rural stretch of the American South. A warm evening had settled over the property, a fire pit going, a group of friends a few drinks in, and trading the kind of dares that sound better the later it gets. Devin Stroud was 26, and the friend in every group who could never let a claim go untested, the one who turned an offhand boast into a thing he had to physically prove. He had a habit of grabbing whatever was nearby to demonstrate a point, sure that doing the dangerous thing once and walking away unhurt was the same as the thing being safe. That night, the argument was about a large machete one of the friends had brought out to show off, and whether it was actually as sharp and as real as the owner claimed, or just a dull display piece. I have watched arguments like this go around in circles plenty of times, and the smart move is always to just believe the man about his own knife. But Devin was never built to leave it there. Insisting the blade was dull and that the owner was exaggerating, Devin took the machete to prove his point in the most physical way he could think of.
From the report I managed to find, friends later stated that Devon had set out there to prove how harmless the blade was by swinging and flipping it around to show off, handling it with no care at all.
Nobody stepped in to stop him or take it out of his hands, because right up until the instant it went wrong, it still looked like nothing more than Devin being Devin, putting on a show the way he always did. A full-size machete is not a toy. It is a heavy chopping blade with real edge and real momentum, and once a swing like that is in motion, there is very little a person can do to call it back. The trick fell apart almost the moment it began. A few swings in, showing off how little he respected the edge, Devin lost his grip on the heavy blade on a careless, looping swing, and the weight of it carried it down out of his control. Instead of the harmless demonstration he had promised the circle around the fire pit, the machete came down across his own leg, biting deep and opening a major artery high in his thigh. He knew at once how badly it had gone, the laughter around the pit cutting off all at the same instant. But a wound that deep to a leg artery bleeds fast and heavy and is brutally hard to stop with nothing but bare hands and a folded shirt. What had been a drunken bit of showing off 1 second earlier became, in the next, a circle of friends on their knees in the dirt trying to keep him alive. The thing I find so senseless about it is that there was no argument worth this. The owner could have just been right about his own knife, and everyone could have gone back to their burgers. His friends tried desperately to stop the bleeding and called for help immediately. But a deep wound to a major artery gives a person only minutes, and he lost consciousness before the ambulance could reach the rural property. He was pronounced dead a short time later. Based on my research, the medical examiner ruled it blood loss from a self-inflicted wound by his own mishandling of the blade, with alcohol a contributing factor. There was nothing malicious in it from anyone at that cookout, just a dare, a few drinks, and one man's refusal to take a genuinely dangerous object even a little bit seriously. To me, it is one of the clearest examples of a death that needed only one person at any point to simply say, "That is enough," and put the thing down. The owner of the machete and the rest of the friends were cleared of any wrongdoing. The death ruled a self-inflicted accident born of his own insistence on proving a pointless point. The blade he had been so sure was harmless was the one that ended the night. That one could not leave a harmless boast alone. Our last story is the youngest of them all, a teenager who turned a silly internet challenge into something his body could not survive. It was January 30th, 2022, in a suburban living room in the American West. A lazy winter weekend had a small group of teenagers sprawled around a phone on a tripod, filming the kind of challenge video that fills an afternoon when there is nothing else to do. Ruben Calloway was 19, and the one in his group who always took the dare a step further than everyone else, the designated daredevil who could not stand to tap out first. He had a habit of treating every challenge as something to win rather than just survive, pushing past the point where his friends were already laughing and waving it off. That afternoon, it started as the old Mentos and Sprite bit, dropping the mints into the soda for the fizzy little eruption, before it turned into something simpler and far more dangerous, a contest over who could chug the most bottles of Sprite the fastest without stopping or tapping out. I have seen these challenge videos go around for years, and the worst I ever expected was a big mess and a funny burp, which is probably why nobody in that room saw the real danger in it. Ruben pulled ahead early and refused to give the lead back, tipping bottle after bottle of Sprite down his throat far faster than anyone else dared, barely pausing to breathe between them so that he could win the round outright.
From what came out afterwards, the others gave up fast and dropped out laughing, but Ruben kept going, forcing down bottle after bottle to outlast them for the camera.
What none of them understood was that the danger was never the fizz, it was the sheer volume of fluid, because Sprite is mostly water with almost no salt in it, and pouring liters of it into the body in minutes is something the kidneys simply cannot keep up with. When that much salt-free fluid floods in at once, it drives the body's sodium level down dangerously fast, and water is pulled out of the blood and into the cells everywhere, including the brain, which has nowhere to swell inside the skull. What the doctors later described was a body knocked dangerously out of balance by the sheer amount of fluid Ruben forced into it in such a short time. As the liters of Sprite overwhelmed his kidneys, the salt level in his blood crashed, and water began moving out of his bloodstream and into his cells, his brain among them. At first, it only looked like he had overdone it, going quiet and a little dazed, swaying where he sat while the others laughed and assumed he was just stuffed and queasy. But his brain was steadily swelling inside the fixed space of his skull, and as the pressure built, he grew confused, then disoriented, then began to seize, his body folding over as the others finally realized something was badly wrong. The mess and the queasiness the others had laughed off was the safe version of this, and he had quietly pushed himself far past it. It actually just mortifies me how ordinary it all looked. Just a kid drinking soda too fast, with nothing about it that warned anyone in the room how close to the edge he really was. Ruben collapsed into a full seizure, and his friends, realizing this was no longer part of the bit, called for help as fast as they could. He was rushed to the hospital, but the swelling in his brain was already severe, and the rescue came too late to save him. Apparently, the medical examiner ruled it water intoxication, a fatal drop in blood sodium from drinking a huge volume of fluid far too fast, the swelling of the brain that followed being the thing his body could not survive. Doctors stressed afterward that it can happen to anyone who chugs liters of any watery drink in minutes, and that it turns deadly long before most people would ever think to worry.
Of everyone in this video, his death, I think, lands the hardest for me. A teenager who lost his life to a simple drinking challenge because tapping out of a joke felt worse than pushing it too far.
No one else was found at fault. The death ruled an accident born of a challenge taken past every reasonable limit. The video was taken down and a short, grim round of warnings followed. The kind that tends to fade long before the next group of teenagers films the next silly dare.